The advent of the Industrial Revolution brought about tremendous changes to existing jobs at the time. In the 17th century, the main means of traveling was the horse-drawn carriage. When the car was first introduced, it brought about many changes in the jobs existing at the time, and many people lost their jobs. For example, stable owners and saddle makers and manure collectors and carriage makers. Um, and yet, many new jobs were created in the car industry. Uh, In the past, it was people who did all the work in the assembly line to assemble the parts together that would create the final product, the car. Now, this work is mainly done by robots. They join the parts together, they weld them together, they do all the paint work in order to create the finished product. And yet, people still have a role to play because there are still quite a few jobs left that humans can do. For example, people still design the cars, or there are still technicians and mechanics that do all the repair work, salespersons and dealers that are responsible for selling the finished product, and of course, marketers who market the finished product so that people will be attracted to it and buy it. The question to ask here is, how do doctors acquire their knowledge? They acquire their knowledge through experience and through self-learning and through comparing uh, data and making diagnosis and prognosis. Machine learning algorithms, which are designed and to learn from their own experience by comparing millions of data from around the globe, they acquire knowledge by comparing, as I said, millions of data. So, in fact, they can be trained to detect diseases, to detect complications, to make accurate diagnosis, because perhaps they have access to more data than a doctor could possibly have access to in a lifetime, because they have access to global data banks, to big data from all around the world, which they can compare and examine in a millionth of a second. Uh, Obviously, this means that perhaps their diagnosis is much more accurate than a human being's. Another interesting question to ask is whether robots could ever replace the job of a teacher. Well, it's interesting in one respect, in the sense that, could a robot relate to students the way that a teacher would? Would a robot be able to build the same rapport with the students, uh, solve their problems, relate to them on a very human level, and deal with all their problems, idiosyncrasies, um, uh, uniqueness? That's an interesting question to ask. On the other hand, there are computer programs like the Watson computer program, which has been designed to answer questions about several things. And they can relate to human beings in more or less a similar way, in the sense that many humans who uh, communicate with this computer program, they don't sort of realize that they are talking to a program and not a human being. And in that respect, according to Turing, who was the first scientist to use computations and to build a computational machine. Uh, According to Turing, the Turing test is designed to test whether the person or the being that you are communicating with is a robot or a human being. And if you cannot uh, if you cannot sort of tell whether it is a robot or not, and you think it's a human being, to all intents and purposes, according to Turing, the robot is like a human being. But that's a different point altogether. And let's get back to teachers. I think that because I'm a teacher myself, definitely a robot would have more access to more a much wider and vast knowledge base than I have. Um, they would have infinite and unlimited patience, whereas perhaps I, as a teacher, might lose my patience sometimes and start shouting, for example. But they would have unlimited patience. Uh, and I think that there might come a point when computers might do a much better job in a classroom than a teacher. Robots did, if robots did all our work, how would people react? Um, it is true, obviously, that many people would welcome such an opportunity. They would see it as liberating. It would free up valuable time, so they could have valuable time to spend with their family and friends. At the same time, they could pursue other interests. For example, many people are interested in painting or drawing or um, singing or doing all sorts of other things and other hobbies which they do not have time for. At the same time, they may find their job as it is now a bit dull and menial and um, uninspiring. So, this sort of thing would allow them to escape from this drudgery, if you like, and perhaps retrain for a more intellectually demanding job, which would offer them the opportunity to reinvent themselves, to discover something new about themselves. The negative side, however, is that despite all these obvious advantages of having more free time to pursue lots of creative interests and discover uh, different creative outlets, the fact remains that without a job, many people would become unemployed, um, and they might feel very resentful that their jobs are now being done by robots and not by human beings. They might be unable to make a living and support their families, which would increase the resentment they felt towards uh, this sort of automation replacing them in the job market. So, the solution to the problem of income that has been suggested is that everybody gets a universal basic income, which could perhaps match the salary, the current salary that people are getting, or perhaps there is a basic income for everyone, um, which in a sense would solve the problem of unemployment. The fact remains, however, that many people get their sense of identity through their jobs, that your sense of identity is very closely tied up with the job that you do. It's not surprising that when you first meet somebody, the first question that you may ask, or perhaps the second question is, and what job do you do? Or where do you work? Or what's your job? Uh, so, and then when we hear what job people do, we inadvertently make assumptions about all sorts of things. For example, about their character, about their financial status, or their level of education. For example, if they tell us, "Oh, I'm a doctor," that automatically leads us to make certain assumptions about their background. And if they say, "Oh, I work as as a farmer, again, that might lead us to make different assumptions about their financial and intellectual background. So this goes to show that jobs are important because they give a meaning and a purpose to our lives. They give us a sense of identity. Together with this sense of identity, they bring dignity or social esteem, depending on the sort of job that people do. Um, they give us a sense of self-satisfaction and pride in what we do. And apart from that, the fact that people have to wake up every morning and then go to work, come back from work, it gives structure to their life. The fact that they have this daily schedule and which they have to perform day in, day out. And apart from that, the fact that they go to work and they meet all sorts of people, it gives them a sense of community, a sense of belonging to a group of people. It could be a group of nurses, it could be a group of teachers, but it does give them a sense of identity and belonging. So for those people who get this very strong sense of identity from work, a life without work, even if they got paid with universal basic income, perhaps it would be a lesser life, an empty life, and they might suffer from the sort of mental health problems that many long-term unemployed people suffer from because they lack a self of purpose and they lack a sense of self-worth because they get the sense of self-worth from the job that they do and the contribution that they make to society through a job that is recognized and valued. Other people, on the other hand, might see a universal basic income as a chance to reinvent themselves, to discover something new about themselves, to acquire new skills, to retrain, to see life from a very different perspective, not the perspective of work, work, earn a living, uh, get a salary at the end of the month, and for them, uh, robots doing their work is a liberating force. It liberates them from the constraints of society as we know it today, and it opens the path to forming a different kind of society altogether. We have always adapted to new technologies, and new technologies have come to create new jobs that have replaced old ones. And perhaps this is what's going to happen now as well. Yes, on the one hand, automation, artificial intelligence, robotics, they are going to replace lots and lots of other jobs. Many people may have to choose to live on a universal basic income. Many robots may have to pay taxes as well, or the companies that sort of use the robots may have to pay taxes for the work done by robots. On the other hand, many new jobs will be created, um, and many old disciplines like philosophy or psychology will take on a new role in order to understand how robots will best interact with human beings, or the role of robots in society that will be in the sphere of moral philosophy, perhaps. And um, so many new jobs will be created, like coders and computer programmers, and jobs that perhaps we haven't envisaged yet. And many old jobs like those, or disciplines like those of psychology and psycholinguistics and perhaps anthropology in the way that sort of they interact with society, cognitive science, how they're going to think the robots, the way they think, the way they process thinking and information. All these jobs will remain very much um, jobs that are going to sort of play a very important role in the future.